being prepared and being clear on why is this person showing up to do Kambo. So if you're, engaging with this medicine, why?
Is there any addictive quality to Kambo?
One of the things that Kambo kind of brings is mental clarity to the point where I've seen people can cultivate clairvoyance.
Talk to us a little bit about your educational credentials. Talk to us about your journey into this world.
I always say that the best way to support someone in integration is by preparing them.
What do you see as the future of Kambo?
If we don't get our shit together as a Kambo community and make sure that these reckless practices that are growing and becoming more widespread, if we don't make sure that these don't turn into accidents, we are going to lose our legal access to Kambo.
Welcome back to the Webdelics podcast, and this is going to be a really interesting discussion today because we have Caitlin Thompson in the house, and we are going to be talking about Kambo, one of those words that sounds cool that I've heard about, but I don't really know what it is. I don't know how it relates to psychedelics. I'm sure a lot of folks listening to this or watching don't. And so, Kate, without further ado, why don't you talk to us a little bit about Kambo?
My pleasure, Scott. Thank you so much for having me for this conversation with Webdelics. I'm really excited. This is my favorite topic to talk about, and I could talk for days, and I do, trust me. So yeah, I guess I'll just start with, what the heck is this? A lot of people call this Kambo frog medicine. So this is a traditional Amazonian modality that comes from the skin secretion of a very specific type of tree frog species called Phylomedusa bicolor. And this skin secretion is a defensive mechanism for the frog, but it's full of all these bioactive peptides that have very potent and profound medicinal qualities to them that modulate immune function, gastrointestinal effects, vascular effects, neurological effects. It's really a full spectrum medicine. But the catch is it does produce this really intense physiological experience, which is quite uncomfortable for people. So the native tribes of the Amazon region have been using this medicine for several hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's a little bit unclear. And they apply this frog skin secretion to these superficial burns made on the skin, usually the upper arm or the leg, but other parts of the body you can also apply to. And the secretion is applied and then absorbed through the lymphatic system into the body within 30 seconds to a minute. It's a very rapid onset. And then that's when someone will start to experience the sensations that come with the Kambo. So elevated heart rates, heat flushing, nausea, sweating, vomiting, diarrhea, facial swelling can also happen. And it's quite an intense process. However, it only goes on for 20 to 30 minutes max. So it's short and sweet, or just short, I would say. But it is a really amazing opportunity for people to kind of what they call go through ordeal medicine, right? Where someone can actually spiritually cultivate through this ritualism and through this symbol of releasing in this purgative process. And the after effects are really why people do Kambo. It's not that the experience itself is all that fun or enjoyable, though it can be depending on perspective, right? It's the after effects that are really the true gifts of this medicine. And traditionally, this medicine was used primarily as a hunting aid, and really for its magical powers to increase hunting luck. But they did also use it for things like malaria and snake bites and illnesses and things like that. But it was primarily used for hunting magic. And now that Kambo has left the jungle and is a lot more widespread in more developed and westernized areas, it's actually evolved into something that is very different than its original use. And now you're seeing it be adapted to the sort of needs and context of modern society with a more neo-spiritual element and like a transpersonal psychological application. So it's really interesting to see how the practice of Kambo has really quickly evolved since exposure and popularization in the West.
This relationship of Kambo to a transpersonal or a spiritual experience, its relationship to the cultures of the indigenous people of the Americas, and the fact that it is something that is very much considered an alternative medicine, at least here in the West, all bring it in common with psychedelics, as well as the experiential nature that you've just described, Kambo bringing into the room. We're going to talk about each of these more or less one by one as the conversation evolves. But let me talk a little bit about what I'm hearing that might get us started down this road. A magical tool used during hunting practices. Now, as someone that doesn't know anything about this at all, what I'm hearing, but please tell me if I'm wrong, is that you might put Kambo on your arrow if you're an ancient hunter, use it to shoot at the animal that you're hunting, and then the magic, being a little bit cynical here, is that the animal gets poisoned and dies, right? Is that really what was going on there, or am I missing the point altogether?
No. The tribesmen would take the medicine to enhance their luck. So in reality, it was kind of acting as an adaptogen in a way and improving their, mental clarity, their visual acuity, their endurance. Allegedly covers their human scent and just makes them hyper perceptual, which is going to improve their skill essentially. But those of us who work with Kambo, we also know there is something kind of quantum and metaphysical about that medicine that is hard to explain, and it's distinct from psychedelics, which we'll talk more about the differences and similarities later, I'm sure. But the actual hunters would take the medicine and then have all these sort of physiological and perceptual improvements that would then allow them to be more successful in their hunting endeavors.
Are the altered states or the perceptual improvements or changes that they experienced related to then why this substance came to be seen as a spiritual or metaphysical element within these cultures?
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that Kambo kind of brings is mental clarity, to the point where I've seen, people can cultivate clairvoyance and heightened sensitivity and like intuition and things like that. And so that's definitely an aspect of this medicine that I think is relevant to the original purpose of using it for hunting. But now we're kind of able to use it to attune to these more subtle fields of perception that are, we can feel that they're real, but they're not maybe defined by objective measurable science yet. um, but I would also say, just in general, the more resourced and modulated and um, balanced one's physiology is, the more spiritually kind of connected they're going to be anyways. So we know there's mind body spirit connections, and when you don't feel good, because your body's toxic or inflamed or not resource depleted, etc., it's harder to feel that spiritual connection with something greater than ourselves or the world around us, because we're kind of like moving through life very dull or uninspired. So I think there is this like dual sort of thing happening where, simply by activating and recalibrating our physiology is inherently going to give us more access to our divinity, as living, breathing beings.
Does that access to divinity or does that enhance spiritual connection and using words like clairvoyance and other things like that in a way, look, that's kind of like catnip. You can't say that to someone and have them not want to know more, right? Is that related to how these substances were integrated into their traditional usage, or is that something that, as they have evolved along with their place within our culture, right, is just seems like it's just part of what this medicine is, no matter what the the set or setting might be that you are engaging in with it.
Yeah, well, I do think that these are qualities of the medicine, and you just look at the different environments and how that plays out, right? So I do, I've heard stories of um, people in the Amazon taking Kambo and then getting like clairvoyance and visions and stuff when combining with other maybe tobacco based medicines like Nunu, which is like a hop based snuff that the Matses use. I do think like, yeah, it still kind of offers that like enhanced clarity and perceptual sensitivity and perhaps clairvoyance and ability to anticipate and intuit things that's really important and necessary for survival in the jungle. Now, in modern contexts, we don't apply those in the same way, but we can still have the benefits of that sort of expanded field of consciousness that allows us to then maybe read situations better or have clarity about if our relationships are working for us, if our jobs are working for us, if our self-limiting beliefs are working for us, whatever. So we have different obstacles to overcome than people who are living in the jungle and hunting monkeys and stuff like that. But I do see that like across the board there are similar themes to the capabilities of what this medicine has to offer for helping people improve their lives in whatever environment or context that they're in.
What I'm hearing then, and this is a whole new frontier of the I was going to say the plant medicine world. I will just maybe use a term that another guest has used to describe sacred medicines, of the sacred medicine world, which is I'm hearing almost like psychedelic. It's almost like this is a psychedelic, uh, but from an animal, as opposed to from a plant or some other engineered substance. Am I getting this right, more or less?
Mm, I would say no, if I'm honest.
Good. Tell me why.
Um, well, first, yeah, I have a bit of a stickler, about calling things plant medicines that come from animals. You can call it an earth
Why?
medicine,
Yeah.
um, or I do like the term entheogen because an entheogen is not necessarily a psychedelic substance. It's a substance that generates the divine from within, right? So it's some sort of like spiritual experience inducing substance or tool or whatever. And I think that's actually a more appropriate category for something like Kambo. Technically speaking, Kambo is not a psychedelic substance. It doesn't have molecules that we would typically classify as psychedelic or hallucinogenic. And that's not generally a part of the experience that people have. I would say that it is mind expansive.
Mhm.
And I think the reason that Kambo gets lumped in with psychedelics is because it's so novel and it's so unique that as humans we try to understand things by comparing them to things we already know,
Mhm.
right? And so I think the psychedelic community at large has kind of lumped Kambo in with all the other psychedelics, even though it is such a distinct tool that works in such a distinct way. It's almost like the analogy I like to use sometimes. Have you ever seen The Nightmare Before Christmas?
I
The beginning.
love that movie. Thank you for
Yeah, you
mentioning
go into
that.
the forest and there's like a door for each holiday,
Yes.
right? And so if you think about psychedelics as like Christmas land or whatever, you go into Christmas land, there's so much there, right? There's so much depth and breadth it's and then there's other doors. There's Easter door, there's St. Patrick's door, whatever. And so I really see that like Kambo is a sacred and valuable tool, but it's in its own world and it gets pulled into psychedelic talk because It is an Amazonian medicine, and obviously there's other Amazonian medicines that are hallucinogenic in nature, that are sometimes used in conjunction, and there are similar themes, right? Because sometimes we're putting ourselves through these challenging experiences induced by consuming a substance, and then that process is healing for us, for different reasons. And Kambo is purgative, right? And so we're kind of used to this idea of things like ayahuasca or San Pedro or whatever
Right.
being purgative and then having this like whole visionary experience. Whereas Kambo, it doesn't quite take you on the same journey. However, I would say that um, it does expand consciousness in a way that's just very unique and a completely different mechanism and a different avenue. Something that's interesting about Kambo is it does have some psychoactive properties to it, but not hallucinogenic. There is a distinction there. So some of the peptides have opioid activity. They have very potent binding to opioid receptors in the body and other tissues, which is really part of the why it's so beneficial. It has these like really valuable effects on like the vagus nerve, which is going to help modulate like communication between the gut and other internal organs, and also stress response and things like that, um, pain analgesic effects and such like that. There's also immune modulating effects simply from the opioid peptides. But it's there really isn't any substance on this planet that I found is close to it. It's kind of like a niacin flush plus an opiate plus um a sauna. Like, I mean, there's just so many strange sensations all combined in one that you really, I haven't found anything else like it. And pharmacologically speaking, that pans out because it's such a unique cocktail of all these different peptides interacting with all these different systems in a way that is just unrivaled by any other substance that humans are used to interacting with.
Is there any addictive quality to Kambo?
That is a great question, Scott. I would say, based on serving thousands of people and being in this space, likely no. And that is the concern, right? When we talk about opioid peptides, and is there like a likelihood of dependence or withdrawals? And it turns out that these opioid peptides are so potent, that they are active in such small quantities that they don't appear to pose the same type of risks for dependency and abuse as conventional opioid or opiate drugs. But they actually, like in some research, some of these Kambo derived opioid peptides outperformed morphine for post-operative pain, for the amount of medicine that they needed in order to manage their pain, for side effects, etc. And just the process of Kambo is not that fun. Like, I mean, even people who are practitioners, like even the people that love it, right? It's still like, oh shit, okay, here we go again. But it's work, and it's uncomfortable, and it's hard. And that is quite a deterrent for people to not abuse it, because it's like punching yourself in the face. Like, how addictive is that going to be?
Yeah, I've got to say, it does not seem like some escape from pain or pleasure that I would want to engage in on a regular basis.
There's certainly, I've never really seen any sort of a recreational application of it, because it's just not fun, and that alone, I think, really keeps it being like a controlled, indulgence for people, that they take it when they need it, and they probably don't take it when they need it too, because it takes a lot of energy to psych yourself up.
Maybe some of those clairvoyant powers really did rub off on you, because you caught my next question before I even had a chance to ask it, Caitlin. I love it. Let me ask you then with the question that I had after that, which was, you mentioned in brief some of the physical conditions that it can help address. Can you talk in a little bit more detail about what some of those might be outside of what you just mentioned a few seconds ago?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the application in the traditional context is different than, what we're using it for in the modern day and age. And part of that is also we have all very different health needs. And what we're seeing is this, rise in popularity of applying Kambo for a whole host of different physical conditions that are perhaps being neglected or failed by conventional medical options, especially these chronic conditions where there's autoimmunity or infections like Lyme disease or Epstein-Barr virus or chronic fatigue. Chronic pain is a big one. Addiction is a problem, right? Same with depression, anxiety, trauma. Um, there's so many applications that Kambo appears to be really useful for. And I've just seen miracle after miracle. And it's not for everybody. Like a person has to be ready, and there are certain health conditions that are contraindicated or high risk, and so you need to evaluate like what the potential reward is going to be versus the risk. But there's people using it for everything under the sun that you can think of. I mean, cancer, getting off opiates, alcoholism, childhood trauma, even like relationship, you know, mending, um, heavy metal detoxification, infections, acute infections, chronic infections, um, bowel illnesses, constipation, or, mood related psychiatric conditions. It's just quite amazing the spectrum of things that seem to be improved with intentional and safe use of Kambo.
We're going to talk about harm reduction a lot more later, but I have to be a little bit of a skeptic here. And not trying to do this in a hostile way. I just want to keep it real. When I'm hearing about the sheer breadth of potential applications here, I'm wondering, well, is this sort of one of those things where it appears to be a cure-all and people are just out there saying that it's a cure-all? And right, that the sort of thing, when I hear it, it can trigger a lot of this is the next shark cartilage fad.
Yeah, skepticism,
Yeah,
right?
and how do you respond to those of us who might be shooting those sorts of questions at you, not with arrows covered in Kambo?
I mean, Scott, I think that's really healthy. And I am a scientist at the end of the day. My background's in neurobiology, and I always like to set up little tests for the universe so that I can explore my own skepticism. And, I've also seen Kambo not work for people. I've seen it not fix their problem. And what I've witnessed is I think a lot of it is contingent upon the whole ritual and intentionality of the container. I think augmenting the power of consciousness medicine, aka the placebo effect, depending on how you want to frame it, is one of the beautiful opportunities that sitting in Kambo can give someone. And I have seen when someone's not ready, when they're not ready to really take accountability and take ownership and be empowered with their agency of their healing, they don't get better. And they go, oh, it didn't work. Or, everyone said this was a miracle cure. And so I think it's really important to use the medicine with the synergy of your own intentionality to co-create outcomes that are actually going to move the needle for somebody. And that being said, sometimes I don't think that Kambo is the solution for everything. Often people will say, oh, well, what about this? What about this? And I said, there's other tools. You should probably use those other tools. Kambo might help. It might give you clarity. It might help you spiritually move forward in whatever that process is of your healing. But it doesn't just do everything for you. It's not a magic cure. It's very much like a teacher, just like these psychedelics are. And integration is really where the fruits of your labor are. And so, yeah, there is this like temporary physiological sort of balancing and clarity and spaciousness that can come from the experience. But at the end of the day, your nervous system and your mind and your psyche are really what perpetuate a lot of these downstream processes physiologically. So even if you are trying to address something that you feel at the core is a physical issue, you can't bypass the psychospiritual elements of that because the brain is literally what's instructing every other system in your meat suit on how to behave. And if you don't resolve what's deep in your psyche, in your consciousness, simultaneously with supporting your physiology, you're going to keep getting pulled back into the same maladaptive patterns of sickness and disease. And so it really comes down to participation of the person and how seriously they're taking the whole process, and then what actions are they taking after the experience is done, because that's really like the meat and potatoes of what Kambo can offer. But it does require people to actively participate and do the work, just like any medicine.
And Caitlin, that is a real, let's be honest about this sort of moment. Thank you for that. Webdelics' mission includes presenting to the public scientifically credible information via guests on this podcast, as well as other formats that have been vetted. And that's why you were put on one of our top 100 thinkers and influencers list. And I raise that because we all know in this day and age, we can go onto TikTok, we can go onto Instagram, YouTube, shoot, down the street, and find anyone that will tell you anything about everything. You mentioned that you have the appropriate educational credentials to support a lot of your thinking around this, as well as the practice experience. Talk to us a little bit about your educational credentials. Talk to us about your journey into this world.
Sure. Well, in some ways, those are actually two separate stories, but I'll try to weave them together. So, I did my undergraduate at San Diego State University in neurobiology, and I gotta be honest, I was using a lot of psychedelics in college. I was going to Burning Man, I was going to Peru drinking ayahuasca,
What?
while everyone was going to when everyone was going to frat parties. I was 21 years old in the jungle of Iquitos and drinking ayahuasca and smoking DMT, and it's a big part of my formative years. And honestly, it was really my passion for psychedelics and the growth that they brought me that really stoked my fire around science, because I wanted to be a psychedelic researcher. And I did. I published research on psychedelics and did a lot of advocacy work there for a long time, until I kind of got captured by my fascination with Kambo, and now that's very much my specialty. But what I was born with chronic illness, and I didn't know it until I was an adult, because when you're born sick, you don't have the contrast to know that that's not normal. But I always kind of knew. I was like, something's not right. I would need to sleep a lot more than everyone else at the sleepovers, and it seemed like hard for me to sit in a chair without being in pain for an hour. And like, there was just little things that I was like, I don't see other people like suffering in the same way. And I started to kind of like figure it out, because I realized I was actually medicating with psychedelics without knowing, until I kind of backed off to focus on some of my really hard classes. And I would notice like clockwork, like every 2 months or so since my last psychedelic experience, I started to become like increasingly um frazzled, and just felt like I would like consistently unwind psychologically, and in my like anxiety and my mood and stuff. And I'm like, that's weird. And then I would take like LSD, and it would go away. And then that happened enough times that I was like, oh, there's something here. And then I realized I had been medicating for some sort of chemical thing that was promoting depression. Later, after a lot of my journey, I actually discovered I have lupus, I have Lyme disease. Did a lot of trauma work to realize that was a big component of it, is like, complex PTSD, food allergies, infections, mast cell activation, ankylosing spondylitis, fibromyalgia, whatever. There are just a bunch of words to describe a system that is really not resourced and attacking itself, right? With all these autoimmune mechanisms at play. And it was around this time that I started realizing, like, hey, something's not right. I think I might actually have some medical stuff going on that I was never acknowledging before, and no one around me really noticed or pursued. And that's when Kambo came into my life. And I do think that that is very synchronistic, right? And so it was around the time that I started engaging with Kambo truly out of curiosity, because I was, I don't know, 25, and I was like, I want to try every weird thing on this planet. I was very much in an experimental phase still, and I'd done a lot of the other drugs, and I was like, yeah, I'm down. Um, but it was unexpectedly profound for me. That first session was again around the time when I was starting to realize, like, I think I have like some autoimmune stuff going on. And I had no expectations whatsoever. And so I went into this really like kind of a blank slate. And I had a deeply profound experience that first session. And I remember the sensation of not being in pain for the first time in my entire life.
What?
And yeah, and I was like, part of it was probably the opioid peptides, right? But I remember being like, is this what everyone else feels like?
Whoa.
And it created this temporary relief to give me enough contrast to see that I had been sick for a long time, and I had just normalized it as a shitty baseline. And what happened was I continued to use Kambo, and my baseline of health just continued to get higher and higher. My recovery time got shorter and shorter after each session, until I started achieving this new level of vitality that I had never even knew was possible. It was like I had broken through the glass ceiling on what life could even feel like, and like what energy could feel like, and what emotional resilience could feel like. All these things that I had never known were accessible to me or even existed. And so I started with self administering. I did like a series of 3 sessions, and then started self administering. And then like my roommate was like, well, can I try? And I'm like, I guess, yeah. So then I started serving people who were asking me. And then like friends of friends started asking me. And next thing I knew, I was serving strangers. And I had no training at all. I'm like the you know, perfect example of like what not to do. But this was 10 years ago. So there wasn't as much resources or education or even people that knew what the heck they were doing. And so I was like one of those weird, pioneering people that kind of just was like, oh, I'll figure it out. And thank goodness I didn't hurt anyone, but like I did not know what the hell I was doing. And I served like 100 people or maybe 100 times before I finally was like, this isn't going away. There's obviously something happening here. Like it felt like the frog was really like putting these opportunities in my lap. Because it wasn't something I necessarily like sought out. It was like coming to me. So I was like, all right, I get it. I'm gonna go get formal training. So then I went and got trained, and got a certification, and it just exploded and never slowed down. Like my whole world just became consumed by Kambo and the spirit of it. And I always joke that like Kambo just made me its bitch. Like it really, I feel in the most loving way. Like I feel like I entered this relationship with it where it just decided like, I own you in exchange for giving you this amazing life and giving you, a path back to yourself. And in exchange, you work for me. And sometimes I'm like, oh God, I need a break, and it will back off. So I do feel that there is, it's a benevolent connection. But sometimes I joke, I'm like, yeah, I made a deal with the devil, sold my soul. But really, it's truly an honor and such a blessing to be so deeply connected with this substance and this ally and this spirit, if you align with that sort of ideology. And man, I just have the coolest life surrounding my privilege of working with this medicine.
The story of the day. Caitlin, thank you for sharing all of that. When you talk about how you began to realize that you were feeling physically well for the first time, and you didn't even understand before that what it was to be physically well. And then you also talked about the spiritual component. I have to say that since my own journey with psychedelics, which I understand isn't Kambo, it moved me forward in terms of my mental well-being, my sense of spiritual connection, my sense of inner joy over time by doing that post-journey work, that integration that you were talking about into levels of well-being and happiness and inner peace and a sense of mission that I could never imagine myself before I went on that journey, in no small part due to the openness that being the host of this show brought to me. So I can completely relate to that. But it is one of those things that can be hard to describe to folks who haven't crossed over, for a lack of better word. One thing, though, that I think anyone can relate to that goes as to some of the things you just shared, I'm going to start off by telling a little bit of a story about something that happened to me last night. I was cleaning some of the porcelain in my apartment using a rust remover. I live in New York City. The water can be a little bit rusty sometimes. And I got some of this rust remover on my hand. And the substance that was activating this rust remover was hydrofluoric acid. So, being a good modern person, I looked up hydrofluoric acid and what can happen if some of that gets on your skin. And Google search results and Google and everything basically told me that I wouldn't feel anything right away, but within 4 to 6 hours, I would start to feel numbness on my hands. There would be deep burns, that I would have scars for the rest of my life. I might lose my fingers and my hand, and possibly also have all of this internal stuff happen to my blood, and I'd be dead within like a day. And, right. And that was just from a few drops of a rust remover. And so eventually I did some deeper research through more credible sources like the Poison Control Center, who were like, flush your hands with water for 20 minutes, you're going to be fine, go to sleep. And I don't want to, say that Kambo is necessarily the same as getting a few drops of something that really wasn't such a big deal. But by deciding to do research on my own without reaching out to the appropriate authorities or experts first, I saw the end of the world happening right in front of my eyes. You talked about having administered, 100 or helped 100 people with Kambo before you were like, maybe I need to be a little bit more careful in my approach here, which opens the door. What are the risks with this? What are the dangers? Because if you research, and I did some research on this before our show, of course, and it was the same as 1% hydrofluoric acid solution, my rust removal. I was going to die no matter what and lose my limbs and have a heart attack before doing so.
Yeah, and it's in this day and age in general, misinformation is a big problem, but especially in the Kambo space, it's like rampant. And I would say like actually 90% of people that work with this medicine believe misinformation. And that's, a big part of my mission with my educational resources and programs and just kind of sharing in general is like, let's like bring some critical thinking into this and let's question all these things that we've just assumed are fact because they're in an echo chamber on Google. But Google doesn't vet, whether these things are true. And so unless it's like on PubMed or, in some sort of credible scientific journal, there's really not like a lot of evidence. And, you really have to look at the anthropological evidence. And if you're a practitioner, the clinical evidence, but still it's like science is a method designed to kind of separate fact from theory, right? Or at least provide some sort of evidence so that you can weigh how much you believe in something being true or not. But yeah, Kambo and any medical intervention, and this goes for every vitamin, every herb, every surgery, every therapy, everything. There's always going to be risks, and there's always going to be people who don't respond well to it. And I must say, despite the violent appearance of Kambo, and despite how really bad it sounds, like it looks on paper. Oh, I'm just gonna get burned, and then you're gonna rub frog poison into it, and then you're gonna puke
Yeah.
all over yourself. Sounds really healthy, right?
Terrifying.
Um, but the secretion itself is actually very safe. It's basically non-toxic. There doesn't appear to be any real damage or toxicity to human cells or organ systems. Um, and it's very well tolerated by people with even very fragile health. I've worked on a lot of really sick people, and when you dose appropriately and you take certain safety precautions to mitigate risks, it is actually such a forgiving substance. I mean, there's so much reckless use of it. And the fact that more people don't die is pretty amazing considering how much I know that there is just like wild, wild west out there. And when there are accidents associated with Kambo, most often it is actually hyponatremia, which is simply water toxicity and electrolyte disturbances. And it's the same for like ecstasy related deaths, right? Like MDMA itself is a fairly safe substance, but it's when people are like pounding a bunch of water and not taking in electrolytes that their salt and water ratios in their cells and outside of their cells can become skewed and cause water to swell into the cell, in things like brain cells, liver cells, heart cells, kidney cells, etc. And then these cells can actually burst. So the most dangerous thing about Kambo is drinking the water. And there's actually so many ways that you can mitigate that risk. One, you can screen for people that might have an increased risk of electrolyte deficiency or disturbance, such as people with certain illnesses,
Mhm.
people on certain types of drugs like SSRIs. They're not contraindicated for Kambo. They're safe to consume with Kambo, but they might alter electrolyte uptake in the gut of someone who's on them. So for someone like that, you can simply preload them with electrolytes and or make sure that the water that they do drink is at a safe quantity. I say like between 1 to 1.5 liters. Anything more than 2 liters, you start to get into risky territory,
Mhm.
especially if they don't purge it out and they actually absorb it all.
Mhm.
But you can also put sea salt in the water that they drink for purging, so that it doesn't just get sucked up right away into the cells and actually sits in the gut and then is removed through the vomiting process. Um, so, yeah, it's like just regulating, having safety protocols around water volume, monitoring how much is going in versus how much is going out, pre-existing health conditions that might put someone at an increased risk, and then giving them some damn electrolytes or salt. It's like pretty easy actually to avoid. The most dangerous thing about Kambo is that sometimes people faint. That's a very normal part of the experience, and the fainting itself is not a problem. But when someone falls and hits their head
Yeah.
because their environment was not arranged appropriately, or the practitioner did not get them to the toilet and they like tried to go themselves, or if people try to get up and walk, that's when they're most likely to have a fainting situation. And if the practitioner is not there escorting them in a safe way to the toilet, that person can fall and hurt themselves. And so you also need to make sure your setting is planned out, and that there's like soft, squishy. So if someone does faint and like fall down, there's a bunch of pillows to catch them. The other risk with fainting is that if someone vomits while they're unconscious, again, not a big deal unless they choke. So making sure that they're positioned safely
Mhm.
so that they're either on their side in the recovery position, or that they're being held, upright, slightly tilted forward with a bucket in their lap or whatever. It's not a big deal. Fainting is normal. It's kind of part of like the visionary aspect of Kambo for some people, but not if they hit their head, not if they choke on their perch. These are very rare things, but it can happen like that. And so as a practitioner, you have to be very vigilant, very attuned, and you have to act quickly. And often I can see when someone's going to faint 5 seconds before they know they're going to faint. And so you do develop skills in being able to identify these things that are going to happen. Um, and then there is, a theoretical risk of people with heart conditions. There is a lot of cardiovascular action that happens with Kambo. There's an increase in heart rate. There is vasodilation. So there's going to be, the veins and arteries are going to expand, and that's also going to drop blood pressure. If someone has extremely low blood pressure, this could also be dangerous for them. If someone has compromised vascular integrity to their heart or their arteries or their whatever, or even other tissues like esophagus, etc., the act of purging or the act of the blood pressure changing could potentially tear or rupture tissue in someone that is vulnerable. Maybe they have a connective tissue disease. Maybe they have chronic inflammation, or they're obese, or they have other risk factors that set them up for having higher risk of some sort of problem. But I have to say, like, the incidence of those things happening are very rare and can usually be mitigated by appropriate mindful dosage. In my opinion, most practitioners are slapping way too much medicine on people, and I take a very conservative approach and emphasize set and setting. And like I said, utilizing like consciousness to kind of get the most out of working with the medicine. So the risks are lower, physiologically speaking, but they're still getting these tangible benefits. And also they're not traumatized and contracted from just trying to survive a high dose of something. So I've found that like really low conservative dosing is the best way that you can prevent accidents and adverse events from happening in people.
And it sounds like also very, very carefully vetting and investigating the process, as well as, I suppose, for lack of a better word, the intake methods that the facilitator that you're working with is engaging in.
100%. And that's something where a lot of practitioners are lacking is in medical screening and, informed consent, and also safety protocols. There is no governing body standardizing what is appropriate to qualify someone as a practitioner. Anyone can be a practitioner. I'm living proof of that, right? I was serving people and I didn't know what I didn't know. And so there's a lot of people that may mean well, and maybe they have really great energy or intentions, but they simply do not understand this medicine. And there's some things that are not intuitive that you have to learn through a training, because we tend to project a lot of these assumptions from the psychedelic medicines, especially like ayahuasca. Ayahuasca culture gets shoved onto Kambo in all of these assumptions, which can actually really be a problem. For example, in ayahuasca preparation diets, avoiding salt is very common practice. If you avoid salt before doing Kambo, you're setting yourself up for a risk of hyponatremia. You should never tell someone to abstain from salt before a Kambo session. And a lot of people serving Kambo don't know that. And it's actually what's, making it so dangerous for people, is just people don't have these very basic safety protocols implemented because they just don't know about them. And so my goal is to like educate people on escorting people to the bathroom, not drinking too much water, not avoiding salt, making sure that your practitioner does a medical screening. If your practitioner does not ask you about your medical history or medications that you're on or any of the stuff going on, that's a red flag. Run far away, because they're taking shortcuts, they're not being thorough, and the chances are they're actually not suitably trained or qualified to be carrying people through such a physiologically intense experience. Because even though we are not doctors, at the end of the day, like, honestly, Kambo is kind of a medical intervention that's unregulated. And so we need to engage in some respects as if we are medical providers, meaning we need to take the time to diligently screen people and employ every safety precaution that is available to us. That's our responsibility as a practitioner, in my opinion.
I'm so glad you're raising all of this and being so forthright. Obviously, we want here at Webdelics the best for folks. We want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can in our way to make sure that harm reduction is discussed honestly and not just sort of skipped over. And so thank you for going into such detail. You've mentioned physical preparation. I'm curious as to also whether you feel there are things that an individual who might be curious about this should be looking for vis-a-vis spiritual or emotional preparation, and perhaps, well, at least as importantly, integration or dealing with the psychological, uh, uh, again, spiritual impact of the experience that you would have had with Kambo.
Totally. I always say that the best way to support someone in integration is by preparing them. And so I think, really being prepared and being clear on why is this person showing up to do combo. So if you're, engaging with this medicine, why? And, it's there's nothing wrong with saying like, I want to try it. I want to check it out. That's okay too. Sometimes discovery is some deeper part of ourself, wanting to explore something. But I think you're generally going to get more out of the experience if you know exactly what you want in general in life, right? If you know what you want, it's a lot easier to get it. And having clear intentions that you can actually articulate in a concise statement is really important because one, it requires someone to consolidate a bunch of chaotic thoughts and feelings into a process where they then have to state it as a sentence. And also when someone writes it down or says it out loud or shares it, it allows them to kind of hold themselves accountable so that they can say it to themselves and also for the universe, because the universe is co-creating this reality with us. And I do believe when we speak things out loud or when we write them, it's part of the magic, right? It's part of us casting spells in the vast web of consciousness, hologram, universe, whatever. Um, and yeah, I think also having a lot of discernment around choosing your practitioner, asking them questions, vetting them. What are their qualifications? What is their experience level? What safety protocols do they have in place? Are they asking you for medical questionnaire or whatever? And also, even if they do all that, just how do you feel when you communicate with them? Because there's a lot of times when someone has a gut instinct that someone is not right for them, but they might have scarcity mentality or an impatience or oh well, if I don't do it with this person who's coming into town this weekend, I'll never find this medicine again, which is just not true. It's out there, it's available. So I think, yeah, really tuning into how safe and comfortable do I feel with this person? Because I can tell you, if you feel on edge with someone who is supposed to be providing a safe space that you can just dissolve into vulnerability with, if you don't vibe with them, you're going to maintain vigilance. There's going to be a part of you that cannot fully let go and relax and trust this person. And that is going to inhibit someone from really actually deeply accessing the parts of themselves and their truth that the Kambo can help take someone to. And I've seen it, when people are contracted and they're not feeling safe, they kind of get into these stoic modes and then they block themselves from actually vomiting. Because vomiting is a nervous system response, right? The brain and the gut have to communicate to orchestrate that phenomena. And so when the nervous system is just contracted and clamped down and putting a wall up and just surviving the experience, that will definitely block the medicine from penetrating to the levels of your essence that it can reach and, help excavate whatever's not serving you. Um, and yeah, that's why having someone serve you who you feel really comfortable and safe with is actually going to create a tangibly, measurably better outcome for you because you could actually let the medicine in and trust that this person's got me. They care for me. They're invested in my outcome. They're paying attention and they want what's best for me.
You just took a question that might have had a seemingly simple answer about feeling comfortable and safe with someone and taken it to a whole other level. Thank you so much for that. Now, you also mentioned that there's no certified body out there that's putting a good housekeeping stamp of approval upon you or anyone else as a facilitator. Talk to us a little bit about the status. And I know you're not a lawyer, so I just want to pre-qualify any answer that you have with regard to that, but the status of legality of Kambo, particularly in the United States and the Western world.
Yeah, so currently Kambo is unregulated in most countries in the world. So it's unscheduled, just like most herbal supplements or vitamins or whatever. And I think that's just simply because it's not on most places' radar yet. There are a few places in the world that do have some regulations now. So Brazil, for example, has regulations on who can advertise Kambo services. So if you are not indigenous, you are not legally allowed to advertise services, because this is how they like to protect intellectual property rights from biopiracy, essentially, of indigenous practices. But it's not illegal to serve or use or possess Kambo in Brazil. Australia is currently the only place in the world where Kambo is illegal. And this happened recently, a couple of years ago, following the very unfortunate death of a practitioner that happened in Australia. And, a lot of people in the Kambo space, wrote letters and presented evidence that, like, this medicine itself is not particularly dangerous. Like, this was a freak incident. And if you, prohibit it, it's going to drive down the underground and make it more dangerous, because now the people who are serving it and taking it are going to have higher risk tolerance in general, and perhaps be more willing to take shortcuts because they're at this point now willing to break the law. So prohibition never makes anything safer, as we know really well from psychedelics. So it's unfortunate, and it has made it harder for people to access Kambo in Australia. I've had people fly from Australia to Bali, where I live most of the time, to receive, sessions. So if we don't get our shit together as a Kambo community and make sure that these reckless practices that are growing and, becoming more widespread, if we don't make sure that these don't turn into accidents, we are going to lose our legal access to Kambo, and that will not make it better for anybody. And so it is our responsibility to clean up our act and create some sort of standard of care and safety and education and qualification, so that we can all continue having access to this precious gift, because we cannot take things like this for granted. And like I said, we know perfectly well what happens when you criminalize substances. You create criminals and more harm. So I pray every day that we are able to rise in our sophistication of how we carry this medicine before it's too late, especially in the United States.
You are taking a spiritually mature, to my eyes at least, approach to what is a legitimately potentially dramatic regulatory issue. And so I thank you for that. It's also the perfect ramp to the next question, which is, what do you see as the future of Kambo?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. And, bear with me. I will get a bit philosophical, just because it's hard to really state what is an ideal future, right? And at the end of the day, of the world in general, right? And at the end of the day, it's like every outcome is going to have positive and negative consequences. And so however things evolve, ultimately I'm okay with, because I am part of something bigger than myself, and I trust that the universe will unfold in its own perfect way, and that will include suffering, that will include beauty, that will, and everything in between, right? But that's just kind of my deeper spiritual perspective. Um, I definitely have sustainability concerns about Kambo, and I spend a lot of time in the jungle on the ground with the frogs, and I've seen them affected in certain areas where harvesting is heavy, and especially with growing modern interest, there has been more demand for medicine. And that has resulted in the adulteration of medicine. It has resulted in people milking other species of frogs. It's resulted in, um, just like fake, adding egg whites or yucca or whatever to these sticks. And we don't really know the full consequences of that. Um, and certainly over harvesting of the frogs. There's still an abundance of them in areas that are harder to reach, but in the areas that are the most accessible and, where someone could actually go and visit and get it, there's a lot of over harvesting happening. And I'm a scientist and I'm super interested in the peptides in general. And I do know that like in the bufo world, right, 5-MeO-DMT, there's a lot of people who advocate for synthetic sources of 5-methoxy-DMT for sustainability purposes. And these days I'm leaning more and more towards that. Um, and part of, the work that I'm doing in my research and with my collaborations is I would like to eventually create some sort of synthetic analog, essentially, like a Kambo inspired cocktail of peptides, because it will never be Kambo, right? Because that comes from a living, complex creature, and it's something you can't recreate in a lab. That's just how nature is. It's that complex. But I do believe that a lot of people that use Kambo, they're not attached to where the medicine comes from. They're attached more to the outcome. And that's very much what I resonate with too. I'm not dogmatic about the actual tool itself. I'm more interested in creating the outcome of healing and wellness for people. And there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. And I think a lot of people that are attracted to Kambo, they just want to feel better. They have cancer, they have Lyme disease, they have depression. And the whole reason they even arrive at this crazy ass frog ceremony is because they are willing to try almost anything. And they've probably already exhausted a lot of options at that point. And so personally, I don't see a synthetic Kambo like drug as being a replacement of Kambo at all. I think that crude, secretion from the frog and the beauty of that will always be available, but it can take pressure off the frogs themselves to have some sort of synthetic option that satisfies the same need for other people that are less attached to the origins of it. And so it's like a yes and I think for some people that can feel um incongruent with like revering the sacredness of this like being of nature. But I think every molecule is sacred, and I think that there is consciousness and divinity infused into every piece of matter, including synthetic matter, because it's all part of earth, right? It's all natural and derived from nature, with just different timelines and processing. And I personally would see something like this as being a gift from the frog. Like I do feel on a personal level, and maybe this is a bit woo, but I do feel that the frog wants that. And that's part of what the frog is trying to teach is like, hey, here's some ideas of something you can develop to continue access to the healing that I was able to bring to your life or other people's lives. So I do think that that is the future of Kambo. Inevitably, is that some sort of like synthetic, alternative option that is going to give a lot of people access to healing that might not have otherwise access to it. Same with like, psilocybin. It's like, yeah, you can grow your own mushrooms, you can pick mushrooms, whatever. But a lot of these, clinical interventions with psilocybin, that's synthetic psilocybin. And that's what people don't realize. They don't realize it actually doesn't come from a mushroom. And yet, it still is profoundly effective for people. And it's still profoundly mystical and spiritual for people. And so, again, I would argue that, like, you can't take the divinity out of anything in life, because we are in God's world, whether we like it or not. We are part of a universal consciousness that lives in every little thing around us, in the air we breathe. And so I believe that this is what innovation is going to look like in order to help preserve the culture of the Amazonian indigenous people, their forests, and their frogs that hold this very special substance.
The nuanced view that you just presented of the future, I found particularly moving because even as we were talking a little bit earlier, but then when you were going into depth about the over harvesting of these frogs, I was imagining a whole parade of horribles like, puppy mills, one of the most atrocious things that there are. And imagine some sort of like endless, I don't know, farm somewhere just full of these frogs in a cage being reproduced like chickens, for
Mhm.
this substance and suffering. And so thinking about the sacredness or the naturalness of all molecules, I just have to say personally, I've always felt that way myself. Everything is from nature. People resist certain types of engagements in the world because, quote unquote, it's not natural, but we are all part of nature. Even these synthetic substances, like you just said, in one way or another, came from nature. We didn't just snap our fingers and they just, appeared mechanically out of nowhere. So bringing some reality into that, thinking about commercialization or bringing a more removed from the original source approach to how these are able to be utilized and ultimately help as many people as possible to stop as much human suffering as there is every day in this world was a beautiful way to move this conversation to its close. And wow, Caitlin, has this been a fast paced and really thought provoking conversation? There is a lot that I'm going to be remembering this episode by. One is simply the idea that a substance from an animal that might not have been in the mainstream for a long time can be lumped into, for reasons that may or may not be valid, a world that is not really the same. I think your discussion about the doors for the different holidays and thinking about how people might confuse ayahuasca protocols with Kambo protocols was really instructive in that regard. Discernment, differentiation when it comes to all of these substances is something that I've become increasingly aware of. And by the way, which is why I recommend that anyone watching or listening to this podcast catch as many as you can, because then you won't be jumping to conclusions of exactly the sort that you were talking about one substance or one set of impacts of a substance versus another without really understanding the nuance and the differences between them. And if anything, this whole sort of like in the US at least, drugs, putting things that are categorically different in one category without even thinking about how they're different, is why psychedelics have been allowed to have been suppressed and not available to people for a long time. Caitlin, if there is one thing that you would like to reiterate that you talked about earlier, or that you didn't get a chance to say but you feel compelled to, please tell us.
Yes, sir, Scott. Um, I think, the most important thing that I would invite people to consider, to, you know, bring into their lives is discernment. I think we can carry reverence while also using critical thinking. And please, 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 if you are going to experience Kambo, if you are going to become a practitioner, if you are going to self administer, if you're going to interact with this medicine at all, I invite you to have critical thinking and discernment. Take your time. Don't rush. Don't let your ego make you want to feel important or whatever. Take your time, do it honest. And follow your instincts, because there's a lot of things that people don't know that they don't know. And so doing research is really important, and really taking the time to find the right provider for you, because your practitioner is going to make or break your experience. And, while the medicine and your intention is so powerful, that person that is cultivating your set and setting and your container has so much influence on what that experience means to you. So please choose wisely and follow your heart, your real heart, not your head.
And we are going to have an upcoming episode with a guest named Tio, who's going to be talking about some of the impact of the facilitator's mindset on some of these various types of experiences. So I think that will be a very interesting kind of sequel to this in a way.
Cool.
Caitlin, you have brought energy, you've brought enlightenment, you've brought soul and spirit. How are people going to resist wanting to know more about you? That I don't know, but tell them, because they will not be able to resist, where they can find out more about you.
Yeah, I have a few different websites. So if you're interested in frequently asked questions and stuff about Kambo, or receiving Kambo from me wherever I am in the world, if you're lucky enough to catch me, you can go to medicinefrogkambo.com. If you are a Kambo enthusiast and you are interested in becoming a practitioner or just deepening your own self-administration practice, we have a number of different educational platforms and tools and offerings for all different levels of safe and in-depth Kambo education. And that you can find on kambospecialist.com. And of course, you can follow me on social media, Medicine Frog Kambo on Instagram and Facebook. And yeah, feel free to shoot a message or connect if you have any questions. But we have a bunch of different offerings, including free offerings like the intention and integration workbook. So if you want to, bring that ritualistic intentionality into your ceremony, that's available on Medicine Frog Kambo. And there's also scientific resources, articles, videos. Just take a look around. You'll find your way, but there's tons of resources for anybody, wherever you're at in your relationship with Kambo.
Generosity with knowledge, generosity with spirit. Caitlin Thompson, thank you so much for being on this show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Scott, and for Webdelics for inviting me, and recognizing all these amazing leaders in the space and giving us a platform.
It's been an honor. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to press the thumbs up button if you're on YouTube, or leave a 5-star review if you are on another audio platform. And then make sure that you subscribe, because we want to hear from you again. And then if you want to dive in even deeper, be sure to follow Webdelics on one of our social media platforms, and then go to our website at webdelics.com. That's WEBDELICS.com. Sign up to our email list, and you'll get a newsletter from us that contains all sorts of interesting articles that dives even deeper into the world of sacred medicine, psychedelics, and substances that we discuss here on the Webdelics podcast. Then, above all else, make sure you return for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.